He was pretty much a psychopath. He would kill individuals that, lost loads to set an example for others to do a better job.
The most wanted drug lord in the world, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, led away by authorities after 6 months on the run.
Here's the poster just released. El Chapo now caught, but it came after a bloody shootout. And in the end, this is what he looked like when he was found.
El Chapo is one of the most ruthless and heartless drug lords of all time. At one point, he was responsible for approximately 60 to 80% of the drugs entering the United States from Mexico. He was public enemy number one for both nations. Luckily, he's now behind bars. But he wasn't an easy man to capture. So, how did the authorities finally take him down? Today, we'll dive into the brutal way they caught El Chapo. Despite living much of his adult life as a fierce leader with loads of power, El Chapo came from humble beginnings. His family was poor. His father was a harsh, brutal man and a violent alcoholic who was involved in the cartel. El Chapo was only 27 years old when he finally began to follow in his father's footsteps. He met another Mexican drug lord by the name of Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. Miguel was a former policeman who became a drug kingpin. He hired El Chapo as his chauffeur, and El Chapo's life of crime officially began. It wouldn't be long before El Chapo moved through the ranks and became an important member of the drug trade. Part of his job involved making sure that everyone was held accountable, and he didn't take kindly to those who failed to uphold their end of the deal. El Chapo was smuggling billions of dollars worth of drugs into the United States. He was a serious threat to the nation. It wasn't just the government that wanted to take the drug lord down, but rivals of the cartel as well. Things would make a drastic turn when a cardinal for the Catholic Church named Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo was caught up in the crossfire of El Chapo and a rival gang that would end up being shot to death. While the details surrounding the shootings are still unclear, it is known that the cardinal was shot in the parking lot of a Mexican airport. The people of Mexico are very religious, and the murder caused a mass outrage throughout the nation. People wanted El Chapo taken down now more than ever. He quickly went into hiding and a bounty was posted to help take him into custody. There was radio silence for 2 weeks until finally he was spotted, not in Mexico, but in Guatemala. He tried to pay off the police for protection, but it wouldn't be enough to keep them quiet.
The money he was paying them at the time to protect them did not cover the cost of protecting such a high-level individual.
El Chapo was arrested and extradited back to Mexico. He was sentenced to just under 21 years behind bars for drug trafficking and other charges. If you thought that would be the end of El Chapo, you would unfortunately be wrong. It was only the beginning. El Chapo was widely respected in prison and would even be called boss by some prison guards. He often got special treatment that he certainly did not deserve. He essentially still had power of the outside world, even from inside his prison cell. The prison guards did as instructed by him out of fear that one of El Chapo's minions would have them killed if they didn't. He was truly living it up behind bars.
It really was a party, and he also would invite the guards and the inmate population. There would be liquor, he would bring in some high-priced prostitutes.
The power that El Chapo continued to have of the drug ring infiltrated the United States, and the country tried to get Mexico to extradite him. They refused. In January of 1998, the drug lord would make a startling announcement. He said he would give up names of the people he worked with in the cartel. He was essentially offering to be an informant in hopes that he could get less jail time. Government officials were hesitant to even talk to El Chapo. They knew the power he had and knew that he could easily have them murdered. They had to make careful preparations to ensure that there was no way that their conversation with El Chapo would be overheard. It was their lives on the line.
We looked under the table, we looked at the table, we looked at the chairs. We felt comfortable enough that we could talk to Chapo there, that we were not being monitored.
El Chapo informed the officials that he was terrified of being extradited to the US. He knew that the prison there would be vastly different from the life of luxury he was enjoying in Mexico. He said if they could promise him he would not be extradited, he would provide them with information. The government officials told him that they couldn't make any promises, but they would consider his deal. El Chapo must have decided that the threat of being extradited to the US was too intimidating for him to wait around and hear their decision, and decided to take matters into his own hands. It was January 19th of 2001, and a guard was making his rounds through the prison. When he got near El Chapo's cell, he noticed that the door was open. This was an immediate cause for concern. He checked the cell, and the drug lord had vanished. A prison guard claimed that he had hidden in a laundry cart and escaped the prison by getting into a car waiting outside. But in actuality, the drug lord had managed to just walk out. A massive search would then go underway. This incredible dangerous man was on the loose and everyone was in danger. The same prisoner that spoke up about how he believed El Chapo escaped was ultimately found dead weeks later. Many officials believe that El Chapo was likely hiding out somewhere in the mountains of Sinaloa, his hometown.
It's a very austere, hostile environment, but he knew it like the back of his hand.
Several years went by and there was still no sign of El Chapo. He was now in his late 40s. Finally, the Mexican government found out that he was held up in a ranch in Sinaloa. There were 200 men that would join in on the effort to take him to custody, but it wasn't going to be that easy. The drug lord had taken a lot of different measures to protect himself. He wasn't going down without a fight. But would his men still stand by him when they were faced with a 2,000-person army? Unfortunately, El Chapo managed to get away. The effort to take him into custody had failed once again. Several years later, he would get married for a fourth time to a beautiful woman named Emma Coronel Ispero, and he decided that a party was in order. Word quickly spread that El Chapo was planning a celebration, and the government decided that they were going to crash the party. But El Chapo managed to escape before they arrived. The drug lord continued on the run and now was selling yet another drug.
He started to go into the methamphetamine business.
El Chapo was now worth billions and the largest producer of drugs in the world. But because he was living a life of hiding and he didn't really have the ability to enjoy his fortune with his wife, he ended up moving to Culiacan, where he and his new bride could enjoy the beach. Now he was spending more time outdoors. He was more vulnerable than ever, and the police got access to a phone line belonging to one of his men. They were then able to get lots of important information about him and his daily life. El Chapo likely knew that people could be listening in on his conversation, but because he had to rely on others to get him the supplies he needed, not using a phone was not an option.
Remember, he's on the run. He can't just throw down his phone. He still needs water, food, beverages. He needs to be able to communicate with somebody, right? So he might change devices, but somehow, some way, he's got to communicate with somebody.
The Mexican Marines knew that even if they couldn't get to El Chapo himself right away, they could get to some of his men. This would at least take away some of his power. So over time and through extensive research, they were able to come up with a list of those closest to him. They then executed a siege during which they were able to capture many of his bodyguards. The bodyguards are brought in for an intense interrogation, during which time they finally break and give up the address of where El Chapo was staying. They planned a careful attack which included the use of a United States drone. But the home was basically a fortress complete with hidden tunnels and steel-plated doors that were put in place to protect the lord and his family. Despite the careful preparation that was put into the attack, El Chapo was made aware of the plan ahead of time and was able to escape with one of his henchmen just in the nick of time. This was shock to both the United States and Mexico. How had he managed to escape so many times? Would he be on the run forever, continuing to destroy lives? Luckily, the disappointment wouldn't last long, and just a few days later, the police were able to verify through a text message through one of his henchmen exactly where El Chapo was staying. Could the time have come that the notorious drug lord and killer was finally going to be taken down?
They were able to pinpoint his location at the Miramar condominiums.
Marines checked with staff at the facility and were able to confirm that El Chapo and his wife, Emma, had checked into the building. They then surrounded the area and they prepared to attack. Police armed with countless weapons approached the room where they believed the two were. They kick down the door but don't find what they were expecting. Inside is an American couple who was terrified and completely confused about what was going on. Now that they knew they had the wrong floor, they hurried quickly to a different floor. This time, the room they were in was getting closer. They came across one of El Chapo's bodyguards and were able to find out from him the exact room where the couple was. They burst into the room and came face to face with Emma, screaming for her husband's life. He was in the bathroom with the door locked and he was armed.
He had an AK-47, but he knew it was by police if he tried to go for it.
Emma continued to scream out, begging for the life of her husband, telling police that he was a father. At this point, El Chapo had no moves left. He had to surrender. Finally, just 3 minutes later, he was taken into custody. Both Mexico and the United States celebrated the victory.
So getting him was a big deal for you.
Absolutely. In my world, it was like winning the Super Bowl, winning the World Series. This was the actual trophy.
He was number one?
Absolutely.
Following El Chapo's arrest, Sean Penn, a popular American actor, made the very controversial decision to interview the criminal from behind bars. This was a decision that some say may have costed him his career. Many believe that giving this murderer even a platform with which to speak was a terrible mistake and something that El Chapo did not deserve. Mexican actress Kate del Castillo would also take part in the interview. One of the questions posed to him during this interview was whether or not he believed drugs could ruin families. While he admitted that he knew that they very well could, he expressed no sorrow over how he had been living his life. He claimed that this was the only life he knew and the only way to build a livelihood.
a destruir. Desgraciadamente, como le comento, por donde yo me crié, pues no había otra manera, ni hay, de sobrevivir.
Even with his vulnerable position, El Chapo wanted to make it evident that this interview was going to be on his own terms and nobody else's. He wanted to control who would use the footage, and he had great trust for Lisa and Sean.
Quiero dejar en claro el contenido de esta entrevista es exclusivo para la señorita Kay del Castillo y el señor Sean Penn.
In a later interview with infamous American interviewer Charlie Rose, Sean Penn took an opportunity to clarify why he had that interview with El Chapo in the first place.
I had only that I thought this is somebody upon whose interview could I begin a conversation about the policy of the war on drugs.
Sean Penn went on to state that he would be no more guilty than El Chapo if he couldn't use his position as a famous actor to at least create further awareness and education on the war on drugs and its effort to save the lives of Americans. But at the end of the day, he would come to understand this was not the right way to go about it.
I have a regret that the entire discussion about this article ignores its purpose.
The drug lord was sent to a Mexican prison where it was said he was being kept under maximum supervision. However, it would ultimately not be enough. Just a year after he was taken into custody in 2014, El Chapo managed to escape once more, this time using a tunnel.
His arrest last year was heralded worldwide. He has now escaped from prison for a second time. Late last night, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman broke out of a maximum security prison about 60 miles from Mexico City.
How could law enforcement have allowed this to happen again, especially after such a short period of time of having El Chapo in custody? There was plenty of anger and frustration to go around. Mexico's safety commissioner came forward to take the heat for the escape and explain how this could have possibly happened a second time.
The escape alert was activated, he said, and the prison staff proceeded to check the cell. Inside, they found a tunnel. A very elaborate tunnel with ventilation and lighting, even a rail system to transport tools and dirt.
There was surveillance footage of the moments right before El Chapo made his great escape. The footage was taken from inside his jail cell.
This is the moment Joaquin El Chapo Guzman makes the Mexican government look ridiculous. Pacing up and down in his cell, calmly, waiting. These are the last images of Guzman before he makes the most daring escape in recent history. At one point, he appears to bend forward, focusing on something in the floor of the shower.
We know now that he was looking at what was the entrance point of the tunnel that he would use for his escape.
Then, he sits down, appearing to remove his sandals. And then, he vanishes.
Mexico had assured the nation that this criminal was being held under tight surveillance. Listen to Eduardo Medina Mora, the Mexican ambassador of the United States, talk confidently about the prison El Chapo was being held in prior to his escape.
He's locked up in the most reliable prison we have in Mexico, and certainly once bitten, twice shy. We will take our precautions in this case.
These precautions were clearly not enough to hold El Chapo down. The Mexican president came forward to share his reaction to the escape.
I am deeply dismayed, he said. This is certainly an affront to the Mexican state.
Part of the rage that was felt on behalf of the United States was that they had asked that El Chapo be extradited to America, but Mexico wanted him to remain in his home country to await trial. This, of course, didn't go as planned. Once again, El Chapo was public enemy number one, and once again, Mexico and the United States agreed to join forces to recapture him. This time, luckily, it would not take as long to find him. A manhunt ensued from 2015 to 2016. Citizens of northern Sinaloa came forward and told police that they were alarmed about a nearby home that they said was filled with armed people. The home was placed under surveillance and police monitored communication that was coming in and out of the home. The inhabitants spoke often about preparing for the arrival of a grandma or aunt. Police believed this was code for something else and that El Chapo could be hiding inside of the home. They waited until a vehicle could be seen leaving the residence. It was a stolen white van. the driver of which headed to go pick up tacos from a nearby restaurant. Police then invaded the home in an operation that was called Black Swan. Unfortunately, El Chapo managed to escape through a secret tunnel, but the effort wasn't for nothing. They now had the information they needed about the stolen car that had been coming in and out of the residence. An alert was issued for the vehicle and everyone was hunting it down. Police were able to locate it in a nearby town called Juan Jose Rios. Sure enough, El Chapo was inside. As always, the drug lord tried to take control of the situation by bribing the police. He even threatened them, telling them, "You're all going to die." Nevertheless, he was taken into custody and handed over to the Marines.
That image of Guzman in handcuffs, sitting on a bed, wearing a dirty shirt. The Mexican president tweeting, "Misión cumplida, mission accomplished, we have him."
Finally, El Chapo had been captured, and hopefully, for good this time. But one major question remained. Was he going to be finally extradited to the US, where he was facing charges in several different states? El Chapo was now facing his worst nightmare. All along, the thing he had been afraid of more than anything else was being extradited into the United States. Now, there was a very real possibility that was in his future. One thing that he had in his favor was that because he was such a wealthy man, he could afford a team of good lawyers. His lawyers fought hard for him to remain in Mexico to await trial. It would soon become clear that the Lord still had some pull in the outside world, and he was willing to interfere with the justice system. Vicente Antonio Bermudez Zacarias was one of the judges who would play a role in determining if El Chapo should be extradited to the US. But on October 17, 2016, he was gunned down while jogging. It's believed that one of El Chapo's supporters was behind the murder. Despite this interference, El Chapo would eventually have to face the music. On January 19, 2017, El Chapo was finally extradited to the US. It was there he faced a slew of different charges, from drug trafficking to kidnapping to organized crime and illegal possession of firearms and murder.
The Mexican drug lord known as El Chapo appeared before a federal judge right here in New York City.
This has been a long time coming. Joaquin Guzman was first sought by U.S. authorities 2 decades ago. He's now being arraigned on charges of running a massive and murderous drug trafficking operation.
He pleaded not guilty to all of the charges against him. Prosecutors made it clear that despite El Chapo's ability to manage to evade the law for so many years, his time tormenting the people of Mexico and the United States was coming to an end. This time, government officials would be certain that there would be no escape routine available to the drug lord. 2 escapes from prison were too many. They wasted no expense in terms of security.
I assure you, no tunnel will be built leading to his bathroom.
Just to give you a sense of how secure this area is, there are cameras around here that can read a newspaper a block away. El Chapo is facing a sentence of life in prison if convicted.
The trial, which was held in November of 2018, was a complicated one, as extra steps were needed to help protect the identity of the jurors and all involved with the legal proceedings. This was clearly a powerful man, and as he had shown time and time again, he could still take people out, even from behind bars. It was determined that the judges would be kept anonymous and El Chapo would be transported with an armed escort to and from the courthouse. He would also need to be kept away from the public for the duration of the trial. The trial lasted until the end of January 2019, when the fate of El Chapo was at last finally resting in the hands of the jury. Would justice finally be served, or would El Chapo manage to escape the law once again? The nation awaited anxiously to hear the final answer. It would take the jury 6 days to deliberate before coming up with their decision.
The dramatic moment in a Brooklyn courtroom today. Mexican King Joaquin El Chapo Guzman convicted on all counts.
Take a look at this next clip at El Chapo's expression as he learned that he wasn't going to be getting out of jail anytime soon. Instead of the smug look he had expressed for so many years, he now appeared scared, his eyes wide open and glossy, and sweat visible on his forehead. Finally, the time had come that El Chapo could run no longer. It was time to face his worst fear, living the rest of his life in an American prison. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 30 years.
It is a sentence from which there is no escape and no return. This conviction is a victory for the American people who has suffered so long and so much, while Guzman made billions pouring poison over our southern border.
Prosecutors made it clear that this time behind bars, El Chapo would not be treated like a king as he was before. Instead, he would be treated as the heartless and cruel criminal that he truly was. He was someone that ruled ruthlessly and deserved no special treatment whatsoever.
He was a killer. He was a murderer. He was a manipulator. But he was also very, very, very smart.
He smuggled any way he could, inside cans of jalapenos, fake bananas, by boat, even submarine.
Upon El Chapo's conviction, he was sent to reside in a maximum security prison called ADX Florence, which is near Florence, Colorado. His life there in a tiny cell block is much different from the life of partying and luxury that he enjoyed in the prison he was kept in after his first arrest. In November 2022, El Chapo tried once again to weasel his way out of life spent behind bars. He filed a form claiming that American prosecutors wronged him. Lawyers say this is nothing more than a last-ditch effort.
He lost his trial, he lost on appeal, but this is a mechanism for him to say, despite all of that, I'm still entitled to a reversal of my conviction and a new trial because my constitutional rights were violated.
The court could ultimately uphold the conviction. For now, El Chapo is behind bars where hopefully he will stay for the rest of his life, unable to bring further harm to more innocent people. Hey guys, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.